welcome everybody. Really wonderful to be with you all tonight. You're more than welcome to use the chat. I'm going to make sure that I've enabled the chat to work properly. Sometimes it should be good to go now. It's just make sure that you use your little drop-down screen to do everyone so that we can all see it. Sometimes it's defaulted to hosts and panelists. So you're welcome to tell us where you're coming from, you know, what state you're coming from, and we'd love to hear from y'all. I see a lot of students already logging in. Michelle Tyson, good to see you. Sad I don't have you this semester. Kimberly, I see some of my advisees in the program. Great to be with you. Oh, Joe Linda, a dear friend from our DREs in the military. Good to have you, Joe Linda. Melissa Else, always lovely to have you. Thank you, Linda from Poughkeepsie. Oh, I have family from there. Good to be with you, Linda. Joan from Milwaukee. Thanks for joining us, Joan. Kimberly, Hudson, Ohio. Good to be with you. And y'all are more than welcome to use the chat feature. Oh, Sarah's on. Hi, Sarah. You can use the chat feature for our Q&A later on, and you're welcome to just put questions and comments, if you like, in there as a way of dialoguing. That's what when Zoom got real big during COVID, they said the extroverts show up in the chat, and I understand that. I'm an extrovert, so feel free to use the chat as you would like to. We'd like to hear from you as we go, or just save your questions to the end. Catherine San Bernardino, great to be with you. Thanks for joining us. Oh, Emily's on twice.
Tracy, I think it's Perlita coming in. I gave her the link, so I don't know if you can.
Oh, you might have given her your link.
Yeah.
Your special link. Perlita, if that's, she can't hear us quite yet. Let me see if I wonder. Let me ask y'all, Kimberly, if you're there, do you have a link that you could drop into the chat for me? And that way we can get Perlita in the regular way. Thank you. I think it would take me a hot minute to go back and find where it is because I only have the presenter links. We'll get started in just one more minute, y'all. Definitely let us know where you're joining us from. We're very excited that y'all are here. This is a wonderful session that we have on becoming a more synodal church with young adults, and we're excited to get started. All right, let's see about, oh, she logged off. I might still have her email. All right, well, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I was sending Perlita a couple of notes right there. Erica, good to have you. She's another student of ours from Youngstown, who I think we're going to see at graduation. Very exciting. Well, without further ado, I want to invite you all into this space this evening, and as we start talking about how to grow a more young adult friendly synodal church. So what does it look like to be a synodal church and accompany young adults? And so we're very excited for our Dynamo speakers this evening. And we have our delightful Dean Michelle Collins, who is going to offer our welcome for this evening. So thank you, Dean Collins, for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Lamont. I don't know the last time I've been called delightful, so okay, I like it. I'll take it. So welcome to everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for this last lecture in the series, Becoming a Listening Church, the Invitation to Synodality, with tonight's topic of young adult involvement in a synodal church. As Dean of the College of Nursing and Health, we're very proud of the Loyola Institute for Ministry and the work and outreach of Dr. Lamont and the entire faculty, and staff. They're a fabulous group to work with. Just wonderful. So just putting that out, we're grateful for all of them. And I'll also put it out there now that my profession is not ministry, so it does feel somewhat daunting to introduce tonight's lecture to an audience made up pretty exclusively of ministry professionals and students. I will admit I don't have a great depth of knowledge around synodality, but thank goodness for the LIM folks, because when I reached out to ask a little bit about the meaning, I was very well enlightened by Dr. Lamont. So I've learned along the way just to be here this evening. As I said, my profession's not ministry. I'm a nurse, actually a nurse midwife. But as I thought about it, nurses do minister through our work. So I do feel somewhat of a kinship with all the work that all of you do. And where our understanding does intersect is in our common agreement that there's a need for all to be heard, but in particular, young people. I was reading an article in the National Catholic Register on why the church has failed to reach young people. And the author, John Welch, said, if the Catholic Church hopes to engage young people and bring them into the faith, they will need to accept two things. First, young people want the truth. Second, young people demand that your actions speak louder than your words. And I reread those words again and again and thought, wow, there's a lot of truth in that. The onus and responsibility is for the church to become more of a listening church, which will open the door to being better able to respond to the needs of all people. And that sounds simple, but it's a tall order to fill. This is such a hard time to be a young person in today's world. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to go back to 18 or 20. So many feel alone or marginalized, and this includes young people in the church. Depression, anxiety, and suicide rates have really skyrocketed over the past few years. And it's just really astounding to note that 20% of high school students report that they have thought about suicide and 9% have attempted it. So young people, as we are all frankly desperate to be heard and acknowledged. So thank you again for joining us this evening to learn how we can embark on this journey to create a stronger, more inclusive and welcoming church. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Dean Collins, for joining us this evening and for your very warm welcome. We're grateful to have you tonight. And now I would like to introduce our newest faculty member here at LIM, which I'm very excited to hear from tonight. We have Dr. Emily Jendzejec. She serves as Assistant Professor of Pastoral Studies at the Loyola Institute for Ministry. She also serves as Project Coordinator for LIM's Field Project, a national initiative working with Catholic parishes to do innovative ministry with young adults. Her primary research interests focus on the experiences of young adults and on the institutional margins of the Catholic Church and the growing phenomena of religious disaffiliation. She's passionate about creating welcoming and supportive spaces that cultivate a sense of belonging among young adults. Dr. Jendzejec has served in numerous ministry settings, working with young adults, including the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, the Ignatian Spirituality Center, the Paulist Center, Boston Community, and the Office of Religious and Spiritual Life at Wellesley College. So welcome, Dr. Emily. We are very grateful to hear from you. And Marysa Alvarez, we're excited to hear from you next. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I think you can see my slide. Can folks see me though? I'm trying to get the spotlight. There we go. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Lamont and Dr. Collins, so much for the introductions. And before I begin, I love, and we're doing it webinar style, so a lot of you can't see who is here, but I have the privilege of seeing who is here, and there's many students and ministry leaders here with us tonight that have wonderful insights and resources and energy around this topic. So I encourage you, as Dr. Lamont said, to use the chat throughout for questions, comments, or just to share resources so we can continue to build community and connect with one another during our hour together and beyond. I'm honored to be sharing this time and conversation with all of you, and especially with Marysa, who I'm really looking forward to hearing from tonight. Marysa is an incredible leader in young adult ministry, Catholic educator and an invaluable member of our Young Adult Advisory Committee for our Young Adult Innovation Hub here at LIV, which I hope we'll have a chance to share about in our Q&A tonight. So for my remarks, I will be covering 4 areas. The first is briefly addressing who it is we are speaking of when we speak of young adults. The second is a look at the history of Pope Francis's commitment to listening to the voices of young adults and how this synod is actually a continuation of this commitment. The third is what this current synod is revealing about the experiences of young adults. And by way of conclusion, the 4th section will hopefully lead us into conversation of what we do with this information. Because hopefully synodality is not just about this moment in time, or even limited to the papacy of Francis, but how we as church move forward together. So before I begin, I want to just share a story from my own experience in ministry with young adults. Several years ago, I facilitated a meeting with 10 undergraduate students about to embark on a faith-based alternative spring break trip. As the discussion began, the students were enthusiastic and engaged in the first question I posed, which was, what do you see as the connection between faith and justice? Then, when prompted to articulate in the second question, their own faith and connection to church, there was silence. Finally, one student expressed, gosh, I really love Jesus, but I'm not down with the institution. Almost everyone in the room nodded. One student shared self-consciously that she went to Mass, but not all the time. These were students that were inclined to sign up for a faith-based alternative spring break trip, many faithfully living out their values of justice and love as disciples of Christ. Yet when prompted about their connection to the church, they expressed a varied degree of ambivalence and even animosity towards the institutional church. I think it is powerful and a revealing example of how many young adults feel about faith in the church today. So who are young adults? I have a couple of bullet points to go over here and some lovely images to share as well. I want to briefly kind of address, who it is we're talking about when we think of young adults. And the short answer is, of course, there's no way to generalize this diverse and complex group. But I'm going to give it a go and at least create a parameter of who we're talking about. For the purposes of this talk, I'm going to be focusing primarily on young adults in the United States. The United States Conference of Bishops' understanding of young adulthood is anyone between the ages of 18 and 39. This is a very wide range. I can still claim to be part of this group on one end of the spectrum, yet married with 2 children, my life is very different than the students I mentioned earlier that I worked with. This age range spans millennials and Generation Z when we're thinking about generations. Anyone born between the age 1981 and 1996 is considered a millennial, and anyone born after 1996 is currently thought of as part of Generation Z. So I will not go into a long sociology conversation here, but I do think it's important as we listen to the experiences of young adults in the vein of becoming a more synodal church, to be informed about generational contexts, gifts, challenges, and opportunities. The more we can understand context, the more we can challenge our own biases and perceptions. For example, a snapshot of Generation Z is that they are engaged, informed, justice-focused, inclusive, and value authenticity. As we look at Generation Z, it is the most diverse generation in the United States. This awareness should be privy to the multitudes of intersectional identities that young adults in this generation embody, and how that impacts belonging and participation. Now, there has been a lot of research that points to the steady decline and disaffiliation of young adults in organized religion. Just Google it and you can find dozens of articles, books, surveys with dismal data. And this is not unique to Catholicism. The numbers are telling. But what I'd like us to do is to think about how important it is to interrogate that data. Young adults are not altogether rejecting their faith, but participating in ways that are not captured in the questions such as, do you attend Mass or participate in parish life? While these large-scale quantitative studies have deepened our understanding of a religious identification in the past 2 decades, they do not always capture the greater nuances of belief and belonging. To get at more nuance, for example, the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate recently conducted a national survey in 2020 on the religiosity of Catholic young adults aged 18 to 35. These findings told a different story of young adult involvement in their faith lives. The researchers found that of the several thousand interviewed, 60% of young adults who identify as Catholic, 60%, indicate in some way that they are practicing their faith outside of attending Mass at their parish. So some examples they name of belonging are small Christian communities, Bible studies, faith sharing groups, or personal prayer practices. Research like this helps us to understand the possibilities and opportunities there are to reach out and begin to share in news stories about how many young adults, how they are indeed leading deeply spiritual and religious lives. So if anything sticks from this first section of my presentation, it is that young Catholic adults in the United States today are more diverse and differently engaged than any other previous generation of Catholics. So we can go to the next slide. So when we think about synodality with young adults, I invite us to back up several years for some more context and understanding of particularly Pope Francis's commitment to listening to young adults. So there's images here of the three examples that I'm going to highlight of synodal efforts, both nationally and internationally, that I want to lift up. The Synod on Young People, the National Dialogue, and the Fifth Encuentro. So the one on the left is the Pope Francis and a group of young people, and it's kind of the picture poster of the Synod on Young People that went around a lot during 2018. So in October of 2018, there was kind of a theme of young people, faith, and vocational discernment. It was a process including 2 years of preparation with local consultations and a pre-synod with 300 youth from all over the world. And the church listened to young adults. These were between the ages of 16 and 29. Pope Francis invited young adults to the Vatican and listened and modeled listening. And these young people then created a pre-synodal document. And in it, they named, quote, young people look for a sense of self by seeking communities that are supportive, uplifting, authentic, and accessible. Communities that empower them. End quote. They name many challenges their generation faces, including social ills, war, climate change, inequality. And this document explicitly states, quote, as we grapple with these challenges, we need inclusion, welcome, mercy, and tenderness from the church, both as an institution and as a community of faith, end quote. They articulated seeking to be listened to and not to merely be spectators in society, but active participants with opportunities to work towards building a better world. It shared the voices of young adults who are seeking to live out their faith in integrated ways and desire to do so in community, calling on the church to be more welcoming, authentic, and inclusive. So out of that synod came Christus Vivit, Pope Francis's 2019 post-synod apostolic exhortation. He proclaimed that young Catholics are giving the church a valuable lesson in the real meaning of synodality. Pope Francis wrote that, quote, it is more necessary than ever today to enter into listening, honest listening, to the joys and struggles of every member of the people of God, and especially every young person, end quote. Pope Francis said that his choice to focus on synodality at this current General Assembly of the Synod of Bishops was a natural outcome of the Synod on Young People. So the second example I wanted to share, which is the image in the middle, is the National Dialogue on Catholic Pastoral Ministry with Youth and Young Adults. This was a collaborative and synodal experience of the Church in the United States and an answer to Pope Francis's call for accompaniment, conversation, and dialogue. Our own Dr. Lamont was a leader in this process and led many listening sessions with young people and ministry leaders. So from 2017 to 2021, the National Dialogue engaged 10,000 people in 450 conversations. Similar what that came out of the Synod on the Youth, in the National Dialogue final report, it shared that young adults called for more integrated and relevant approaches to faith and everyday life, more guidance and accompaniment during life transitions and vocational discernment, more ministry opportunities and funding support. So out of this also came some recommendations from the National Dialogue, which included more intentionally connecting the life of faith with the lived experiences of young people, the need to do more synodal listening, the need to address the authenticity gap, an increase in investment in accompaniment and expansion of ministry with young adults, and finally, the need to embrace the complexity that young adults experience and bring. So the third example I want to lift up is the fifth Encuentro. The fifth Encuentro was held in Grapevine, Texas in 2018 and was attended by more than 3,000 Catholic, Hispanic, Latino leaders from around the country, including more than 600 young adults between the ages of 18 and 39. They gathered to discern ways in which the Church in the United States can better respond to the needs of specifically Hispanic Latino Catholics. In the listening sessions, young adults voiced they are ready and willing to take on responsibility for and within the Church, as leaders and not as the next generation of leaders. One participant remarked on the feeling of sometimes being felt like being treated as a child, which dismays young adults. She's a young adult herself. She worked in her diocese. She had a master's degree in theology, yet felt even at the meeting of the bishops during the Encuentro, the focus was too much on, quote, music and chanting and an atmosphere that did not take us seriously, end quote. So when looking at these three examples, we see much commonality. Young adults want to be listened to, taken seriously, and to have meaningful opportunities to participate, to lead, and to be in deeper relationship Christ and with others. They bring with them challenges and hopes for what it means to live an integrated life of faith within an authentic community. This is a far cry, I believe, from the non-committal, disengaged narrative that is often associated with young adults. We can move on to the next slide, bring us to the current synod. So much of what has been shared through this synod and many of the listening sessions with young adults only reinforces what was heard through earlier methods of listening to young adults. So first, I just wanted to take a little bit of time to say, how did young adults participate? Many dioceses put out surveys and some did not. But those that did, some young adults filled them out. There was listening sessions that were young adult specific or parish specific. So there was basically a very degree of success in how the synod was sort of rolled out. And there's acknowledgement of that too. But I wanted to lift up two creative ways that I saw kind of in doing research on what this looked like with young adults. So the first is the top image here. And this is Father Evan Ponton, who is an associate pastor of St. John the Evangelist in a parish in New Jersey. He led a discussion on synodality hosted around an outdoor campfire. Many young adults came, not only from his parish, but from around the diocese. I think this is a great example of just getting out to where young adults are, where they may feel more comfortable sharing. And the second I wanted to lift up was the bottom image here, which you can go and still see on YouTube. It's a really fantastic conversation. It was a session put on by the Loyola University of Chicago. So on February 24th, 2022, Loyola hosted a conversation between the Pope and university students from North, Central, and South America. The students shared concrete educational projects addressing environmental and economic realities and concerns. Thousands of people tuned in to listen, including in me and maybe some of you. It was powerful to witness Pope Francis as just like a square, like we are tonight on Zoom, and not talking, but listening. In some of the pictures, you can even see him. He actually has his notebook out with his pen as he's listening to these young adults. These two examples highlight not just an approach to gathering information, but to being a synodal church with young adults. We can't expect young adults to take surveys within parishes they are not attending. We must go out and listen and meet young adults where they are at and to ask what they are passionate about. Do the next slide. So a little bit about what the listening sessions and the synod has kind of come up with so far of what young adults are continuing to say. So overall, a large number of participants of all ages in the synod sessions stated that they believed the church is not effectively reaching youth and young adults. Young people's perceived lack of participation in parish life is a source of great pain for many. There's many quotes of older generations lament about the departure of young people. One quote, for example, is, "I feel like a failure because I was not able to hand down my faith to my children who are now adults." And another, "It breaks my heart to see our children that we brought to Mass and sent to Catholic schools and colleges reject the church." So one named central theme from young adults in the listening sessions is that they feel disconnected from the institutional church and feel that there is a lack of engaging social and faith-based activities for them to participate. As the US synthesis noted, quote, "Young people want the church to speak out about issues that matter to them, especially justice, race, and climate change," end quote. There was a specific example given from the Diocese of Newark that shared that many young people who participated in the session, over 1,000 students from middle, high schools, and all 4 Catholic universities in the Archdiocese, feel the church does not accept them or listen to their concerns about social issues and mental health. So while some, as just named, express justice issues as a central way they want to connect more with their faith, there were many others who also named a need for more opportunities for spiritual nourishment and opportunities to develop and grow in their spirituality and prayer lives. Young adults also voiced a feeling of exclusion and desire to participate more fully as participants and as leaders once again. The synthesis report named that youth who participated in synodal sessions stressed that they should not be seen or spoken of mostly as the future of the church, but should be recognized for their importance now and given a significant voice in the present. They want to be seen and heard and included more in church life, especially in participating meaningfully in parish and diocesan councils and ministries. And these same sentiments, interestingly, appeared this past week. There was the publication of the North American final document for the continental stage. So it just came out last week. And in it, it quotes, "Authentic acknowledgement and respect for the gifts and talents of young people is another vital aspect of a co-responsible church in North America," end quote. Yet even the document names that many delegates at this continental stage lamented the absence of young people, both in their parishes, as well as in this continental assembly that came up with this document. So there's a continued disconnect to address here. I wanted to name too that these concerns from young adults in the US are not completely unique to the US nor even North American synodal process either. Through this international synodal process, there is a universal consensus named and enlarged the space of intent, which is sort of the document that came out after all of the national synthesis came out, looking at a renewed focus on young people. Their formation and accompaniment is an urgent need, it shares. It also quotes Antilles' national report as it states, "Since our young people experience a high degree of alienation, we need to make a preferential option for the young." So a preferential option for the young, what is that? It's not to seek to alienate other generations, but to bring life and flourishing to the whole universal church. So I wanted to share a bit now about what do we do with this information, a few takeaways. So go to the next slide. And I hope that this leads us into conversation and into Marysa's conversation with us as well. But I'd like to suggest from what I presented a few takeaways and consideration for what is a preferential option for the young. So first, while it is true that there are many young adults disaffiliating from organized religion, there are also many young adults actively involved in their faith, leading rich spiritual lives. But it's just not through the in-the-box way I think we associate with as practicing Catholics. So I believe we can change the conversation from approaching young adult involvement in the church as one of a crisis and lament to one of an opportunity for engagement and hope, perhaps curiosity and possibility. I believe this could be seen and exciting in new, emerging, innovative ways of being and doing church better together. This leads me to my second point, that from a place of possibility and openness, we should be reaching out beyond the pews and confines of church buildings, inviting young adults into participation and engagement and leadership, not to come back to tables already set, but to help us in resetting the tables. It is in this shift of thinking about inclusion as one where authentic accompaniment can occur. Honest dialogue is valued, and young adults can help us lead church into new emerging realities guided by the Holy Spirit. The third takeaway is that when I speak of we, I truly mean we as church. We do not have to wait for another post-exhortation document to tell us what to do, but I look forward to it and hope it's inspiring. Pope Francis describes synodality as a model of church. He said that a synodal church is a church that listens, in which everyone has something to learn. I think there's great opportunity in a church that listens. We all can get out and listen. We can ask young adults in our lives, in our communities, what do they care about? What brings them joy? What keeps them up at night? How can the church better support them, accompany them in navigating the complexity and multivalent challenges of life? So when I think about what it looks like to go out to where young people are, I want to offer two concrete examples, and I invite others to brainstorm in the chat as well. So as a college chaplain, I spent most of my time out in the community, not in my office. Whether having coffee at the local student lounge, cheering on students at sports games, attending student plays, going to public lectures. So I got to know students on the campus community. It was through being interested in them as whole people with many interests. I began to be seen as a trusted person that they felt comfortable coming to, and not just a chaplain present inside the church on Sundays at Mass. I offer another example in a parish setting. So at the parish I worked at, there was a Wednesday night supper club, a soup kitchen, that went on for years and years. It was a really powerful part of the community life. And many of the committed volunteers were young adults. They showed up every Wednesday in the church basement in downtown Boston. Most of these young adults never went to Mass, but would consistently come to serve week after week. They were not part of the parish in the traditional sense, but were very much part of the work of the parish. Volunteering on Wednesdays myself was a great way to get to know young adults. And I often look back on this example and wish I had committed even more time to being present on Wednesdays and to seeing it as part of my ministry. In reflecting on it even tonight, I was thinking I wish I had the language to share with my supervisor at the time, that actually being there was in fact part of my ministry and not something extra. So on the flip side, going out to where young adults are, congregations must also discern what are we inviting young adults back into and how to support young adults in cultivating a faith that brings them closer to God. I think if parishes are hoping that young adults come back to parish life or to church for the first time, then we must take a long, hard look at what we are inviting them to participate within. A question I often sit with is how can church be a community of breadth and diversity, large enough to hold the questions, doubts, critiques, and creativity that young adults bring? Discerning the answers to these questions should bring us both hope and challenge. If you have not already, I don't know if any of you have seen The Pope Answers. It's a new documentary on Hulu. It's a profound experience of Pope Francis. I think it just came out a week or two ago, but it's a profound example of creating space for real dialogue with young adults. Basically, the Pope just hanging out with 10 young adults and insights in an hour and a half to what their conversation looked like. While he never uses the word synodality, it is a clear example of him modeling the synodal church. So finally, young adults value relationship and notice authenticity. So then how do we authentically journey together? I believe it's by learning from and with one another so that we can better reflect the wonderful, multifaceted reality that Christ Church is meant to be. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Emily. I couldn't get my video on. That was wonderful. Thanks so much for your presentation this evening. And I am very excited to invite Marysa Alvarez, a LIM graduate, to join us with her response today. Marysa was born and raised in New Orleans. She spent her life in both Catholic and public school settings, even through college. She would go on to earn her degree in history from Southeastern Louisiana, and then on to earn her master's degree in religious education with a concentration on youth and young adult ministry from Loyola University, here at LIM with us. She's been working in various roles in ministry for the past 7 years, working for both Catholic schools and Catholic churches in Louisiana and South Carolina. She held positions such as young adult minister, coordinator of children's ministry, and campus minister. Utilizing her gifts, talents, and knowledge she has gained over the years have brought her to where she is today. She's currently working as a high school religion teacher and campus minister, and also serves on the Young Adult Council for the Archdiocese of New Orleans. Welcome, Marysa. We are delighted to have you this evening.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I feel like I do a lot, but still not a lot at all. But thank you for that wonderful introduction. And Emily, thanks for sharing all of your thoughts. I feel like you had so much to share that even as you were, I know we had spoken before, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much more I want to add to it, but I can't. So I can be long-winded. So I just want to highlight a couple of things that I think are super important that related to me, but also to people that I know. And I know I've talked to several of my friends about it, and we're kind of all on the same page with how we're feeling in our personal communities. And the first point I want to talk about is like the point Emily made about young adults have this desire to be included, to feel included. And we as humans are relational beings. Like, we want to be in relationship with other people, and we want opportunities to be a part of something. So reading through and listening to what Emily has said, it's, I think, kind of sad that young adults still feel like they're not connected. They want a church that's authentic, that's inclusive, that's welcoming, and they're lonely. They're wanting these relationships. And it just strikes me as, I guess, disappointing in a way that we have not met them where they are. And something as simple as being welcoming. As I was reflecting and thinking, I think a welcoming church is where my mind goes immediately when it comes to young adults, because I do want to feel included. I want to feel like there's a place that I belong. I thought of a story or an experience I've had recently where I'm kind of in a weird place in life where I don't really know which church I want to belong to. My boyfriend and I go to church together, but in different areas. So trying to find a place where we can call home, where we feel welcomed. And I finally found a place in my area. And what put me on to that church was the moment I stepped in the door, they welcomed me. As simple as, good morning, how are you doing? Like, welcome to church. And I felt for the first time that I was being seen, not just a simple hold the door open and good morning. You know, it was a little bit more than that. And my boyfriend is not Catholic. So we also go to non-denominational church. And that's a point I wanted to bring up as far as feeling seen and heard, and feeling like I had a place I belonged. So in the Catholic church, like Tracy said, I've worked in the Catholic church, both in church and schools, and have felt like I always had a place, but I was really tied to my parish, and I had built relationships with the people who worked there, with other young adults, and kind of found my niche. But eventually, once I changed parishes, things started to change for me. And as you guys probably know, we go through these hills and valleys in our faith life. And I just felt the desire to be fed. And so in the parish that I was a part of, there were no opportunities for me to be fed unless I was the one doing the feeding. And working in ministry, it's a role where we're constantly giving of ourselves to others. And I think it's so important, in order for us to give, we have to feed ourselves. So I got to the point where I didn't know what to do. There were no Bible studies at several of the parishes I have been visiting lately. And so my boyfriend and I decided to go to a non-denominational church in the area. So like I said, he's not Catholic, but he has agreed with me since the start of our relationship that I am not changing my faith, and our kids will be Catholic. We will get married in the Catholic church. Our children will go to Catholic school, all of that. So he's on board with Catholicism as far as supporting me and being there for me. But since he's not where I'm at, I guess, spiritually, it can be a challenge for me when I'm in a lull. So we decided to try something different. Instead of just going to regular church, we decided to try non-denominational church. And I had gone to this church before, and from the moment I stepped on the campus at an event I was invited to, they did something that I wish our church would do. And that was being a welcoming place. For the first time, I felt extremely seen and appreciated. From the time we stepped on their campus for this event that I went to with my friend, they had food trucks, they had music playing, they had people coming up to us and just talking to us, asking us how our day was going, and just being very personal, building that relationship with us and making us feel comfortable. Eventually, the night would go on to where they had music playing, praise and worship, and then they led a talk about sisterhood. And it was all about women supporting women. And it was biblically based, and I loved almost everything about it. It was still weird being Catholic and going into a new environment, but the idea that we can support each other and lift each other up in a setting that was outside of my church, I think was what made me feel a little uncomfortable. But I loved what they did, and I was like, why doesn't the Catholic Church do it? So that's why my boyfriend and I decided to go back to this place. And again, they did a great job. I'm going to use the word evangelizing, I guess, like really tying us in, pulling us in, making us wanting to be a part. Because as soon as we're walking up, this man opens the door and is like, look at this handsome couple walking, and how are you guys doing? How's your been? Just being super personal, and even inviting us afterwards to go and have coffee and sit and chat with just people. They had free refreshments and things. So I felt like, as a young adult, feeling the need to be fed, just like many young adults do, this desire to be a part of something, not to feel alone, to be included. They did a great job of making me feel seen, making me feel important, making me feel included in a church that I'd been to one time. So I feel like there's so much we can learn from our Protestant brothers and sisters when it comes to things like that, of building a community, especially one that's geared towards young adults. And I know that range is huge, but sitting in this huge church, looking around, the amount of young people from high school age to, I assume, college, young adulthood with little kids and everything, it was kind of surprising to me to see so many young people in a place like this, and kind of disheartening too when it came to church when I go. But I also like the 8 o'clock church, and y'all might know that's usually like really early. So you don't see a lot of young people at that one, but I don't always see young people. So I felt very much a pull to continue to go there. We go every so often, but just a way to kind of feed us in a way that I don't always get fed at my own parish, which makes me sad. But as far as me ever wanting to dive into that, I love my faith so much. So what keeps me Catholic is like being rooted in tradition. The things that we do are not like any other place. You know, I can go anywhere in the world and find a Catholic church, and I think that's beautiful. I love the real presence of Jesus, the Eucharist. That keeps me connected. And when I go other places, I don't feel that. Like I said, we went to this church, it happened to be Palm Sunday. And though the music was great and the message was wonderful, it kind of felt like their youth group to me. And I loved it. Like I said, I felt fed, but there was no tradition. There was no, Jesus was not present, even though they had communion, but not in the way that we, view communion. So that was different, but they didn't even mention Palm Sunday. They didn't talk about Jesus in that way. They didn't talk about what was the upcoming events. So I think the tradition of the Catholic Church is beautiful to me. And it's something I don't ever want to lose. So I know I would never leave my faith. But for young adults who might be lukewarm in their faith, I can understand their pull to a place like this, especially one, like I said, that is so inviting, so welcoming, and lets them leave feeling like they had a purpose or they got something truly out of it. So I think a lot of what young adults experience, at least on my end, is you want to be seen, you want to be heard, and you want that authenticity. So the fact that someone who you don't even know, a stranger, took a true interest in you, at least in me, I was surprised, like, wow, it was more than just good morning. So that meant a lot to me. I know our talk is about synodality. So looking at the idea of synodality, Emily had asked me, what did I think about it? And I kind of laughed and said, is it bad that I don't really fully know how to answer? I don't really know what synodality is. So when we look at young adults, my first thought was of being inclusive. So I understand synodality is the idea of us accompanying young adults, listening to young adults, being a listening church. But if young adults don't understand our terminology, what's going to make them, feel connected to us? We're using language that perhaps is more exclusive than being inclusive. Emily gave an example of the priest who held a young adult session by the fire pit, right? But he held a synodality, a talk on synodality. I know if I was a young adult, I wouldn't fully know what that was. So I think sometimes our vocabulary can be tricky. Sometimes the things that we say or sometimes the things that we do, if we don't fully understand them, like I said, it becomes more exclusive versus being inclusive. So if we want young adults to feel connected, we really have to try to meet them where they are. So put things in terms they understand, offer opportunities for what they need at the time. I think Emily also made the point of having Bible studies and other opportunities for community. If young adults are looking for a community, we need to feed them with that. So I think I've seen that in various aspects. It's not all negative. We've seen good things come from things in parishes, events in parishes. So I'm hopeful that through talks like we're doing now, these dialogues, also these different, what's the word that's escaping me? Different writings, things that are getting put out there. We know that young adults have a desire to be involved and want to be connected. They want to be in relationship with their church, the church institution, but also with people within the church and feel a connection. So I'm excited and I'm hopeful that through discussions like this, bringing about social awareness, that people are going to want to be more involved. People are going to want to step up and do something for young adults. I feel like we're in the phase of we're just getting warmed up. And so things are about to be set on fire. We just have to keep pushing and keep trying. There's a lot of good to come out of young adults. Like we said, they're not the future church, they are the church. So what can we do to get them excited, get them on fire, feed them in ways that they haven't been fed yet, give them those meaningful relationships, work alongside with them and journey with them throughout their processes in life. So I think there's a lot of good, and like I said, I could ramble on various topics about young adult ministry, but those are the main points I wanted to hit. And I think it's important that the big takeaway is young adults want to be in a relationship. They want to be in a community. They want to grow in their faith. They want to learn, and they want to be taken seriously. So it's up to us to include them in what we do versus being exclusive. So I think that's all I got. Tried to keep it short.
Thank you so much, Marysa. That was really wonderful. There was just a lot of themes that I heard between, you and Emily. Particularly, I love the way that you talked about terminology, Marysa. Our language can alienate. I'll just briefly share an experience. I was helping folks here at the Archdiocese put on a synod listening session with young adults, and the table that I was facilitating, it was anybody was invited to come. It was kind of Christ in the City. And it was like an event after that. And it was kind of a formal event. They knew what we were doing, and many, many tables filled with young adults, and my table of young adults. And I just started reading the questions from the synod. And I said, what is your experience of journeying together? And they looked at me and they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, right. So do you feel that people listen to you in the church? And I was going to say, do you feel accompanied? And they were like, huh? And so even right away, just the synod questions alone had to really be translated into a language that is inclusive to young adults. So I really appreciate you saying that. And I think the two of you challenged very strongly the narrative that I hear from a lot of ministry leaders, that there are no young adults and that young adults are not interested. Emily, you raised up the CARA report very well, in your own experiences with young adults, and Marysa, yourself as a young adult, and the young adults I've been talking to, they want to be involved. But then the other side of that is the build it and they will come doesn't work either. And so I think you addressed really well, both of you, the personal invitation that, addressing the authenticity gap, that we really have to be, as ministry leaders, be able to be vulnerable to share our story so that people can see themselves as a part of this community instead of like a sage on a stage or something, or like we've got it all together, as ministry leaders. Like we have to be able to say, hey, I had a rough time with my faith too. Hey, you know what? I had a hard time as a parent when I was a young adult. I felt like I was failing, like just to be honest, with our young people. And that's maybe one way to bridge the authenticity gap. So I'm just so grateful for your thoughts today. Everybody that's here, please, if we have time for Q&A right now. And so I welcome any questions that you have, for our panelists here. I see a lot of thank yous. Margaret Johnson wrote, thank you, Marysa. I'm hopeful too that things are just warming up and about to be set on fire. I love the sense of hope you both left us with. Crystal said, awesome connection of Catholic and Protestant. Yes, I agree, definitely. Yes, Megan, we'll share all the documents that we can. We have one question coming in that is, how do you approach a group of young adults? So I don't know if you want to elaborate, would be a good starting line to them. How would you maybe go to a group that's already existing, maybe is the question. You have any advice on that?
Marysa, what are your original thoughts? I'd love your insights.
Well, I think my first thought was, are we talking about, like, I'm a young adult about to go into this young adult group? How am I going to connect with them in that way, or trying to lead a young adult group? I know it can be daunting as, like, looking at my first question, it can be daunting as a young adult going into an already established young adult group. From personal experience, I have done it, and I look around and I feel bad because I'm like, I don't know if I fit in with these young adults. But I think trying to be involved in, for you to like grow your spiritual life and try to build a community. There's usually always somebody that you can make a connection with. But if it's in regards to leading a group that's already established, that's also a daunting task, because trying to understand the community, every community is different. I've learned that working in Charleston and working in New Orleans area, the needs of young adults are different in every parish you go to, and their desires are all different. So I don't know if I fully answered the question, but I think it's both daunting, but it's a challenge that I think we have to try to face.
Thank you, Marysa. Go ahead,
Marysa. I was just going to add, I love, and maybe it's jargony, so I'll push back, Marysa, if this authenticity gap feels jargony, because I just loved that point. I'm going to sit with it for a while, of just even the questions about listening. How do we make them more inclusive? So, but I think it's the same approach in just being authentic, right? And coming in an openness to learn and be with people with no agenda. I think I've at times witnessed people in parishes, when there's like one young adult come, there's like 6 people, they're like, thank you for being here, will you be on 10 things? And I think there's an anxiety in that. And so kind of hoping to have that authentic welcome and invitation to be seen and heard, and just noticing yourself how you're approaching and how you're welcoming and for what reason you're doing it. And I think being able to work on ourselves and before we go to that welcome is something important to sit with, and I know I continue to sit with.
Thank you both. We have a couple comments. Maybe some we could frame in terms of questions as well. There's a comment from Nancy that young adults are emotionally excluded, and I've experienced that too, Nancy. The older generation elders seem to be struggling to understand that they have to change, not the young adults. Maybe more youth need to be at the door greeting. They seem to be whisked in and shushed. Yeah, that can be the case in some places. And that's, a friend of mine, she's shared that, it's not necessarily that they need to change. It's that, I often find that maybe our elders need to be listened to, because there's something deeper going on as to why they don't want to really kind of pass the baton or allow young voices to be heard. And, my friend Diana Hencherenko, she's at a parish, she's the adult minister in Youngstown. She recently gave a presentation for NIMYA, the National Institute for Ministry with Young Adults. And she said she found when she talked to the older folks in her community that they were afraid of being replaced. So there's something much deeper going on there than just kind of like, we don't want to hear from young people. I find there's always, in LIM, we always say, seek a deeper understanding. And so I think if we could model synodality with our older generations on behalf of our younger generations, we might really be onto something. And somebody has a comment here, kind of has a comment about kind of dealing with newly ordained and maybe just priests in general that kind of have a different way about them. Maybe it's more orthodox, maybe it's more, the label of conservative isn't really the greatest, but that's kind of labels people use. So I wonder, and I think that's a general, I think in my experience also, there's a challenge sometimes with pastors that aren't very interested in putting resources towards young adults. So I wonder if you two might respond to, what do you do with leaders, and especially when they're ordained leaders that are really not responsive to young adult ministry?
Do you want to go, Emily?
You can go. I'll go after.
I think, thankfully, I've been in places where I'm blessed, where most pastors are supportive, thankfully. But I feel kind of bad because even though pastors say that they're supportive, a lot of time they don't take the initiative. They'll be like, oh, it sounds like a great idea, but they're not actively seeking out a young adult person to be a part of the community or to step up in these roles to help lead young adults. So I feel like it takes kind of persistence to be like, hey, I know some young adults who are interested. Can we use the campus as a place to meet, to have a Bible study, and just kind of keep pushing the priest to implement something, especially if there's a desire there and you have a few people that already are interested, even if it's 2 or 3, that's still a group who wants a place to meet. So I feel like a priest should be like, yeah, come on, use our campus. This is a place for you to go.
I think that's really well put, Marysa. I don't know if I'd have more to share, except that these are real challenges, right? And I think what's really beautiful about our faith is thinking about sort of unity and diversity and not skirting around that. Dialogue is hard. These conversations are hard. They're not easy. And there is a lot of conversation to be had. But how do we continue to show up and commit to one another? Ordained or lay, it's really important. And we're sending you that beautiful point of persistence from a place of faith, right? Like creative fidelity to our tradition, and to ultimately the hope is that we all have, the underlying goal of bringing people into relationship with one another and to Christ. And so how do we start from that shared hope and that shared love of church and of community?
Thank you. And there's one more that I think that's framed as a good question. So Linda, thank you for your comment and your question. She writes, I'm in campus ministry and some of the students talk about wanting to learn more about the faith of their grandparents. Perhaps they're comfortable sharing this as I am around the same age as their grandparents. In our parish, the focus is on families, so the young people and grandparents are at the margins, which is interesting. Are there ways to foster intergenerational dialogue? That's a great question, Linda.
I think this is a beautiful question. I have just a lot of respect, and I'd love if people have ideas of how this has been done well, please put it in the chat, because I feel like I want more ideas. But I do see that. I think it's just this really interesting conversation, and Tracy and I talk about this a lot, about how, when we think about young adult ministry, we're thinking about ministry, right? We're not hoping that young adult ministry is sort of a side thing that the parish does. It's how do we integrate young adults into the life of the parish? And young adults want this too. We see this, and not just being leaders, but being in authentic relationship with one another. And in my time in the parish, one of the most authentic bonds were those intergenerational bonds that were made on pastoral council, in the choir, in the lector groups that met on Mondays to pray over the following Sunday's readings. So I would just say full-hearted yes to continuing to think creatively of how we do this intergenerationally as well.
I agree with Emily. I don't think there's like a a certain way to definitely do it. I feel like there was a class at Loyola I took, Tracy, you might know, where we talked about trying to, bridge those things, and each, I guess, group kind of feeding into each other. My brain was first thinking of like young adults leading youth group, how we kind of give back to each other. So I don't know, like we said, if there's a definitive black or white answer to that question. I think it's just having a conversation and being a part of those ministries, like Emily was saying.
Yeah. And I think, if we want to look to the synod as a inspiration for it, then open up spaces where they can talk to each other, just create, maybe it's like an evening of reflection. Maybe it's just a meal together, where you invite two different generations, and maybe there's a couple reflection cards of like, hey, can you share a time when you were young and you struggled with something, and like little prompts. But is there a way we can get people talking together and forming relationships? There's a student of ours right now who's in the capstone course, and her concern for her ministry praxis concern is about loneliness. And she finds that there's loneliness, tremendous loneliness that they're documenting in young adults, and just as strong in our older generations. And to me, that seems like there's something that can be done there. I mean, the wisdom that our older generations have about committing a life to the church has a lot to offer young adults in terms of how do you hang on to your faith? How does your faith help you through hard times? And if we could make space for that, and do maybe it's a small group of 4 and 4, don't start big, trial and error, like start small. And another graduate of ours who's out in Arizona, I'll try to find the link if I can. It's hard for me to talk and find the link at the same time, but we did a spotlight on her because she completely, after studying with us, pointing that out, she completely overhauled her confirmation program. And so she created her own curriculum with her pastor, the books that they were going to read, the students in confirmation class, they were mentoring the youth, the young adults were mentoring the youth in confirmation class. So she had a whole young adult group that was like kind of doing a mentoring, teaching and things like that, like a peer-led, peer-to-peer ministry, but then young adult to youth. And then the parents were invited in also to take part in a different style of learning with, like with books like by Richard Rohr, and really kind of exciting spirituality books. And it was hugely successful, and so she just kind of came up with something and tried it, so I think, and that's kind of what the young adult ministry field project is like, try it. And if it fails, try it again, like, and learn from it. Like we learn through failure, so that we have a couple more questions here. Maybe we could take one. I think Crystal had a really beautiful question, kind of back and forth. Crystal, I'm going to combine both. They're in the Q&A there. Did you have a sense of, so kind of to Marysa, a sense of synodality in your experience with a Protestant church? Did you feel like there was a sense of that there? And then alternatively, what would you bring back to the Catholic faith of your experience of different faiths? So like, what did you see that maybe could be called synodal in your experience, or not, to what extent? And then what does that help you bring back to how does the experience in the Protestant church enrich your Catholic faith?
Really good question. I feel that I probably could have, I don't know the right way to say this, but I could have probably spent more time at the non-denominational church to really get a better sense of synodality. But as far as just feeling heard, even in those brief moments of just feeling like they were being authentic and they actually wanted to listen to what I had to say and inviting me to have coffee afterwards. I noticed, though not invited to, but if you wanted to sign up and become a member of the church, they even had a room off to the side that you could see as you entered, where they had water and paperwork and like a table, but it was very welcoming to where even if you went in and you're like, oh, I do want to join this church, you knew people were going to be sitting down with you and trying to connect you to different things. On that women's night, they actually do that. They have people walking around to interact with you and ask, how can we get you connected? So I think they do a really good job of, like I said, making you feel seen, making you feel heard, and helping you find the place that you belong. And I think the Catholic Church how easy is it to put on like a fun night? Like, it's super easy. Like you can go get food trucks, ask them to come out and see if you can get your choir or your youth group, depending, to play some praise and worship music, have adoration, and have a talk after it. So I think there's lots of ways that we can integrate what they're doing successfully, because the amount of people that show up to these nights is tremendous. I think they do 2 women's nights a year. And I would say there's at least close to 500 people in this building. Plus they have different satellite campuses where people are viewing it too. So it was very much something that we as a Catholic church could still mimic and, like I said, just be welcoming, be inviting. When I worked in Charleston, they made these things called Connect cards. And it was a way, if you were a new parishioner, you could stop by the welcome table and you just kind of write down things you're interested in, and they would pass it off to ministry leaders. But even something as simple as that you use in a parish could be great, a great tool that's similar to the things they do. But having people who sit and meet with you to build those relationships, to be like, oh my gosh, you would love to be a part of this. Let me connect you with this person. They're actually at church today. Let me go grab them. So I think it's all about relationships and building connections. And they do a really good job of that. And I think we could copy that. It would be great. It's easy.
I have a example of in my hometown here. There is a Lutheran pastor who's wonderful and trained in community organizing. And she came in and started listening to the needs in the community. She's like, gosh, the first couple of years I was in town, I was just having coffee with a lot of people. And primarily her mission was thinking about young adults. And the big thing that kept bubbling up was lack of accessible childcare. And so kind of after starting around with thinking in an ecumenical way too of different churches, was able to create a co-op childcare center in the basement of a local church that's thriving. They just got this huge grant, and they're doing opening another center as well. And I think that's just a beautiful example of kind of being church outside of the walls and bringing people in creative ways. Again, without an agenda, but living out their faith and seeing what the needs in the community are. And I now kind of continue to see that community, that faith community as well, thriving because of their initial invitation to ask people what's going on in their lives. How can churches be supportive and meet people where they're at?
Yeah, Sharon was writing here. She's on a committee for the Vincentians, looking at what they can do to meet the needs of youth and young adults in Vincentian communities. And so she was reiterating that what you were saying now is what took up a lot of our time. How are we just creating space for people to gather, to feel welcome, to work together? And I think you both named it so well tonight that's the building blocks. I mean, it's not just, the events are great, but like you have to feel a sense of connection, and so how do we build those personal connections with young people? And it looks different. I've talked to some folks that, they're in young adult ministry, and they get some pushback from people that they work with, either in their parish or their diocese. They're like, why aren't you in your office? It's like, this is not a 9-to-5 office job. I'm having coffee with young adults. I'm going out to where they are, So I think there's a tension in our traditional institutional way of doing church and ministry that we've got to really kind of push back on that and support it and say, ministry with young adults is not going to be like, come to my office at 5 o'clock in the afternoon or something. Like, they have lives, they're working like 50 jobs, and they have kids, and so we really have to figure out what works for them and go to them. And that takes, Sharon, you said it very well, it takes time, but that time is worth it if you can look at it that way. So I realize that we are close on time here. And so I just want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. I am Dr. Tracy. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Tracy Lamont. I am interim director of the Loyola Institute for Ministry and assistant professor of religious education and young adult ministry. And thank you, Dean Collins, for being with us this evening as well. We are excited to have you in our college, and I'll just make a few brief announcements. What I'm going to do is share, I think it's easiest sometimes if I just share my screen. So I'm going to just show you a few things. I'm going to hope this works. I'm going to share my desktop, and then y'all, can you see a website that says upcoming events? Thumbs up, yes. Great. So this is our lecture series. If anybody here lives in Orlando and is affiliated with LIM or LIMX in any way, join us. I'm going there Saturday. I can't wait to see many of you there. Very excited. If you are local here or you want to take a trip to New Orleans, we have our Summer Institute for Catholic Educational Leadership, June 5th and 6th. We are unpacking the new directory for catechesis. Very excited about that. Ella Miloweska, who I am very sorry if I have butchered your last name. She is up in the Archdiocese of New York, and she's a phenomenal speaker and really knowledgeable about the new directory. So she'll be facilitating our groups that week. If you know anybody who is a rising junior and senior that is interested in dealing with climate change and how their faith can make a difference in that, please let us know. And I will very, very gratefully put all of these links in the chat here, if you give me 1 second. So here is our upcoming events. And if I go to our semester course offerings, if you are interested in what you have heard here today, then we have a course on youth and young adult spirituality and methods of faith development this summer. So you are more than welcome to sign up. You can be a part of the degree program. You can take it as a one course at a time. You could be graduate, you could be continuing ed. So that's another opportunity to learn a little bit more. And on top of that is Loyola's field project, which is quite wonderful. And so I'm going to go ahead and put that in the chat as well. We are granting up to re-granting $15,000 to $30,000 to parishes to do innovative ministry with young adults. And so that application process is open right now, and we are taking applications through May 1st, I believe. And dear Marysa here is on our Young Adult Advisory Council, which I will show you that right now. So very grateful for our Young Adult Advisory Council as well. Thank you, Marysa. And if you're interested in what we are offering here at Loyola, we have graduate and undergraduate programs. What I'm dropping in the chat right there is our graduate programs, and these are our continuing education certificates. And so we are just very, very excited to have you all here. And I think I put the link to the upcoming events, but I just wanted you all to know what we have and what we offer. And if you're ever interested, just come study with us. We have very exciting programs. They're fully online. You can take them on campus if you live here. And you can study youth and young adult ministry as a focus area in the MPS program. So thank you all for coming this evening. Very excited for this Synod session. And if you go to our upcoming events page, you go to the lecture series page, that's where you're going to find the recordings. So all the recordings are going to be there, and I'm very happy to drop that in the chat before we all go. And so thank you again, Dean Collins, for joining us tonight, and thank you, Marysa and Dr. Jendzejec. It was just so wonderful to hear from you all tonight. I think we have a lot to process. I'm typing, sorry. And so I'm grateful for all of your time and for everybody for joining us tonight. Thank you for being with us, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everyone.